G'day, you're on Fresh FM with the Deadline Report, Ben Vigin Investigates. And today's story is dun 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 dun. I love it when a plan comes together. We talk to you about the issue of Covid-19 Plan A versus Plan B. Now, just for those who don't actually understand what that actually is, Plan A is basically what we call the Imperial College model. It's where we have been put into lockdown and there are restrictions, and it's based upon the idea that eventually we'll create a vaccine and we can administrate that and it'll all be good and we can all go back to this thing called the new norm. Plan B basically says, no, let's actually turn around and actually just hang tough and we'll actually endure it, and eventually we'll develop herd immunity so that when it comes to us next time it won't be such a big deal. New Zealand has opted for, and Australia have opted for Plan A, and we're increasingly becoming one of the few countries out there that actually is, as we start to realise that the math behind Plan A is not all it's actually cracked out to be. Now, before we get into that too far, I'm just going to do some very quickly housekeeping. I have a website, postmanproductions.com. This show goes out on Sunday afternoons 1 p.m. or Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. every second week on Fresh FM. We have a little money jar there for donation box, so if you want to donate to it, great. I just very quickly add to the point is only put that in there if you can afford it. Only if you go and to look at my site and you actually realise that that money actually goes towards producing the show. I'm an independent journalist. If you feel, on the other hand, that you're a better way spending your money, then go ahead and do that, but share and like our pages instead. You'll also be helping us. The issue I probably also have with Plan, what I also kind of, what this all came out of to begin with, was actually, I was just making remarks to say, well, isn't it interesting that, we've got this event going on at the moment, and there isn't actually a lot of ads on television or posters around town telling you how to actually just improve your own health and well-being to enhance your chances of not being inflicted by this very serious virus. You go to the doctor, they always tell you, eat, don't smoke, don't drink, sleep, eat fruit. But there's a real lack of, put garlic in your soup and count COVID from the door. What we see is we've been told to wear masks, we've been told that we're sanitizers, you've got to do analyze that. So everything's about big tech and about big pharma, but the idea that we can actually take responsibility, or at least partial responsibility for our own health, has largely been missed out of the media channels, which is, again, one of the little red flags going on here. And someone, of course, responded to that saying, gee, well, the Swedish herd immunity doesn't seem to have worked out. Well, I wasn't actually talking about the Swedish herd immunity, but I'm glad that they actually brought it up. But before we get into that, let's take a wee bit of a break very early on the show. Let's get it out. I was going to give you the new math, which is a rather naughty little number, but it's probably a bridge too far for community radio. So we'll give you Thomas Snyder's The Statistician's Blues. As Disraeli once used to say, lies, lies, and damn statistics, or as I like to say, 9 out of 10 men who have tried camel have discovered they prefer women. You're on Fresh FM, the Deadline Report with Ben Vigin. And you're back with Ben Vigin's The Deadline Report on Fresh FM. Let's get back to this idea, however, that the Swedish model is a disaster. Well, to begin with, the worst case scenario is, no, it's not. There are plenty of countries out there that have actually performed way worse than Sweden. What people are actually really talking about is the fact that what people actually keep talking about, I just realised you'd better get a camera shot angle there, just trying to run new equipment at the moment. What people have actually been talking about is that initially, early on in Sweden, there was a proportional spike in deaths, which didn't put them at the bottom, but it didn't exactly put them at the top for role model. And most of the people that were being infected, in fact, it's the case of COVID-19 in general, was how the high elderly proportion. The Swedish model failed to put into account enough protections for the vulnerable in the community. This is a comparison to where you've got in Southeast Asia, specifically in Taiwan, who have been used to SARS and H1 and N1, and they had these things in bases, and by and large, there has been very little inconvenience to these Asian-based, especially Taiwan, who have gone more for this. It's not so much about the herd immunity, because I think that's a bit of a misconception. But they've said, look, we've done and we'll get into this a bit point, but we've done the threat harm minimization model. We don't feel the need to go to those extreme measures. We feel that we can carry on, and the long-term harm versus benefit model is actually beneficial, and that the statistics seem to be bearing this actually out. In Sweden, and the other interesting thing is that we see in New Zealand, they love these headlines, anything, it's like trying to always knock the Swedish model, but the Swedish model, one of the things that have gone out, there's been a meme out there, and again, I turned around and did mine not too long ago, conspiracy theories, how to avoid fake news stories, learn your ABCs, which was very quickly followed by the mainstream media doing their how to avoid conspiracy theories 1, 2, 3, but in my model, I turned around and said, well, one of the things you need to work out is there a source behind, where is the source behind documentation behind the claim? And this meme that we've been seeing going out, it doesn't actually have anything. I've tracked it down. I think a big woman called Carol Rowley actually produced it. She doesn't have any additional expertise in epidemiology or pathogens, as far as I can actually make out. But she's also pulled some once you actually turn around, don't go and look at the data and cross-reference and actually, figure out where it's come from, she's pulled some really, pretty fudgy statistical kind of tricks. One of the points is she turns around and tries to make this comparison about that in Sweden, the unemployment is a lot higher than New Zealand's. Well, yeah, because number one is that when they've drawn their figures from the same time zones, so that's not an issue. But the issue is that in New Zealand, those official New Zealand statistic figures don't include the long-term unemployment, which means that you add 2% onto that figure, and they're not including currently the people on the Covid-19 wage subsidy, which then pushes the unemployment figures up to 8.6. So that's roughly what Sweden's already occurring to begin with. So that kind of negates it. And if that person was being a bit more honest about this, the way that they put the statistics together, they would have made that clear. And I kind of stress that point because the second thing actually is a little bit more kind of like, you can make mistakes, that's fine, but this is a little bit more of a tricky one. That they turn around to suggest that New Zealand's Sweden's unemployment is tanking. Well, we're stating the fact that Sweden is part of the European Union, so there's a joined at the hip factor. You have the situation that those figures that they present for Sweden are actually collected from the second half of the year, which is the June 2020. Those figures haven't been released in New Zealand, and the figures they've actually drawn from are the March 2020 figures, which are basically pre-COVID. So they've picked one group of figures that when COVID was just about occurring and no one really knew what the impact was and it wasn't going to shape up, and then they've compared a group of figures after the event. And so that's a real, that's a bit of a sleazy statistical sort of trick. Obviously, we're standing the fact that, of course, that Sweden and New Zealand have completely different government factors. And so when you're trying to do these comparisons without actually looking at all these vectors, it's fairly, meaningless. Of course, when you also sort of look at the situation that's when you look at the kind of cross-reference of New Zealand media versus other media, looking at the Swedish model. When you go away from New Zealand corporate media, which is, very much accepting the press release of the government of the day, you find that they're a little bit more balanced, and they kind of recognise that there's some, lots of very beneficial side of things in Sweden, and they still make a couple of mistakes. One is this issue where they look at Sweden's death figures literally. When you deep dive and you look at actually Sweden's figures are based on a basically they kind of go, they diagnose someone at home that dies, and they're not sure what the cause is, but the person had COVID-like symptoms, it becomes listed as COVID. So those figures aren't actually necessarily accurate to, we don't know whether those people already had the flu. We do know that they, in many cases, have pre-existing conditions. So those figures aren't as crystal clear, even when you're looking at overseas media. And of course, throughout the world, everyone has different methods of the way they've been collecting. Those figures have been going up and down. So again, the data is not hard and fast, and you really got to be a little bit more specialist when you're actually throwing things out there to understand how statistics can be really, played around with. I said my previous song was the statisticians at Blues. And of course, we also get into singers. But what I kind of get into is the other issue is the situation is that probably one of the biggest things that's been bugging me is this goes back to the original issue of how we chose our response, and this is this Imperial College method. Now, again, I'll kind of try and break this because this is a super important point. in the Imperial College model, or in any model you pick, is you're doing a formula, and the formula is trying to reach this goal of harm minimization. What is the thing that we can do that will actually result in the less people dying, to put it bluntly? Now, if you don't get that formula correct, you can do more harm than good. So it's not just a question of saying, oh, look, we did this and we've only had these 19 deaths. That's only looking at the short term now. We don't know what the economic consequences, well, we actually do know what the economic consequences are, but those economic consequences of the formula has actually been not done correctly will produce more people. People are going to die as a result of the economics. And I explain that. Economics is not just about business being open and making money. Economics is about whether or not you can afford a hospital. Now, we're seeing in Dunedin already that the intended plans for the Dunedin Hospital are being downscaled. There's still questions about post-elections about whether this will actually be built. So if, as a result of COVID-19 our decisions, we don't have the money to do it, that hospital's not going to get built, which means that people are not going to get saved, basically. We've seen the fact that I think that the figures listed, and again, if you want to have a critique of the show, this is probably one, because I need to probably source this one, and I'll see if I can. I'll put that on the website. The figures listed is something like 10,000 people in New Zealand. The severity of the cancers actually increased during COVID-19 lockdown because they couldn't get access to health. So when you look at the Imperial College, which the New Zealand figures are based upon that Imperial College model with direct input by Neil Ferguson, the man that ran next door to Shagger's wife, after saying that he actually, we'll get into that in a second. But the Neil Ferguson model turned around and said that there would be, even with controls, that 10,000 people would die. So the decision was made to base down that this was the way that the least amount of people can actually be hurt if we go down for this lockdown model. Now, that hasn't happened, but what we have seen is that 10,000 people now will not actually, they've reached a point of the cancer where it's going to be questionable about whether or not treatment can actually be effective, or it's going to cost them more to actually reach that same net benefit. We've seen the fact that the St John needs $30 million for its ambulance drivers, can't do it, so that's 100 ambulance drivers that are going to be not out there on the street, which means that when you call 111 to call ambulances, can take longer to get there, more lives lost. We may actually turn around and see more lives actually lost as a result. And this is the thing that people really not getting excited about. Oh, who could have known in hindsight? Well, yes, there is. There are very much detailed protocols that go through this, big folders that follow this formula. Steps you go through, and in New Zealand, however, what we did in the UK to begin with, and this has created a small academic rebellion in the United Kingdom, because they've all turned around and said, actually, the UK model decision-making process by Boris Johnson, the man that bought you Brexit, was too slanted and affected by corporate lobbyists, and they've got very, very, it's created very big problems. The Lancet's come out in front of the rebels, so it's a very fractional division. But the basically turned around and said, well, no, actually, the problem is that we've got the Imperial College. It's one of the groups actually out there that's racing and stands to make lots of money out of vaccine. Turning around, you saying, oh no, we need to go down to Plan B, A, and they've issued out a protocol scenario from Neil Ferguson, the statistician, a man who's made mistakes, who wrote his code in handwritten, which as soon as released on March 13th thereabouts, had other epidemiologists going, no way, this is wrong. He had to admit that actually this was actually amended very, very quickly. So, oh no, what I actually meant, and the very key point too, is that this has been accepted by both the press and almost on the same dates. In the UK, it was about March 27th. The United Kingdom, New Zealand was March 30th. They added these little add-ons to the articles about this, saying, oh no, this is what he actually meant. Only problem is that when you go into the report, that's not actually what's stated in his own words in the report. Now, there are graphs that have been now amended after effect on, for example, you look at the graph March 16th showing the report, it says one thing on the Imperial College's online newsletter. March 17th, you can actually see there's a new line being actually added in, but the text remains the same. So, and at this point, having come under pressure by epidemiologists saying, no way, Neil Ferguson turned around and said, I've got COVID-19, I'm going to have to run away, and we've got to do this to lock down to save lives. And then, of course, he jumped the fence and went next door and shagged his neighbour's wife, which, to me is actually not a small thing, not because it's the issue of, here's the guy saying, we are going to literally cut the country billions and billions of lives. We may not be able to buy a hospital, people not being cancers may not be able to be diagnosed, there may be poverty, which may lead to further fuel of disease, poverty-related deaths. But we must stay at home. You know, I'm building my entire reputation on this. But I'm going to now jump across the fence and actually show that it's one rule for you and another rule for us, which was then repeated here in New Zealand when we saw David Clark, Minister of Health, I get my Clarks and Parks and News, turn around to this, literally sent out a tweet, stay at home, you are saving lives. This was on a David tweet. You know, he tweeted this, and not once, not twice, but 3 times. Okay, and people, oh no, no, that last time didn't count. Well, my information actually was there are other cases there, and even we go benefit to how many times when you're the Minister of Health in charge of a once-in-a-lifetime crisis, can you not actually, you know, you're not being a very good role model. And that's, you know, that's the first issue, red flag I have actually with this whole Plan A, is the people that were pushing it weren't living up to their own rule book. And that's actually been, you know, kind of along the way. They've been saying one day, actually Bloomsbury's been us saying, oh, you know, only wear a mask if you want to because they don't actually do any good. Next day, the information has been constantly changing. And that's, you know, you expect from your government to get consistent information, whereas a lot of this information has been largely politicalised. And we couldn't turn around and say, there we are, got Imperial College, boom, releasing the pathogen. Imperial College is also turning around and making the vaccine. Then you turn around and discover that, you know, this has actually come out of a lot of people pushing the Imperial College are the spin doctors that have come out of the Westminster, the Yes Ministers. And of course, you know, let's not forget, these are the people that Jacinda Ardern, our own Prime Minister, who is a communications officer, she is trained in the dark arts, which, you know, we so often, we don't take that into consideration about how present our media stage, or not just Jacinda, it happened with John Key as well, but how increasingly the way our information gets delivered to us is controlled, it's very tightly narrated, and it's delivered by these people that are specialists in this Yes Minister principle. She worked in the United Kingdom under Ronnie Flanagan and William Sargent, and these are people that sold Tony Blair's private to public partnerships, big pro TPPA, big pharma, and so we're seeing basically this revolving door amongst the same organisations, the same politicians, the same bureaucrats, the same academics that all revolving around with jobs for the boys. And that, again, is, you know, that's the second red flag on this whole particular issue. I think we'll just take a little bit of a break right at this stage. We're going to cut to the theme tune for today is all about Plan A or Plan B, or Plan A, there is no Plan B. So let's go with the theme song from the A-Team. Dun 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 dun. You're on the Deadline Report with Fresh FM. You're listening to Ben Vidgen. You can go to my website, which is Ben Vidgen. Sorry, the Postman Productions Ben Vidgen. Just Google it, you'll find it there. We're talking about Plan A and Plan B today. We've just been covering the whole issue about the issue of the fact that our policy has come out of the Imperial College. The flaws that were, you know, these are really, really serious issues which have just been brushed aside, and we don't talk about that. They're brought to you by the actual people that, you know, the Boris Johnson government, the Brexit people. It's been quite interesting because this issue has actually been quite a polarising one, and I'm not quite sure Helen Clark, Jacinda Ardern actually quite gets at you know, what's going on here and how it actually serves who it serves in the long run. And I'm kind of curious about that because, you know, it's no, you know, we'll look at the fact that Winston Peters actually has hired Aaron Banks and Gilmore, the bad boys of Brexit, to be his election strategists. So he may actually be using this whole polarisation to actually climb himself and get a bit of a match point. And I don't think people really thought about that issue enough. This has become a very politicalised issue. You know, the other thing, so you talked about the lack of role models. We've talked about let's cut to the chase. You know, getting rounding up to the end of the show. Plan A basically boils down to it requires a vaccine. And again, I'm not opposed to vaccines. I'm very pro-vaccine. However, and I do believe that vaccines save millions of lives. However, for a vaccine to do more benefits than more harm, is all about efficacy, EFIACY. This can take years to develop in a vaccine, and there is no certainty that you will actually achieve this ever, especially as different viruses and pathogens actually mutate, and means that each year you've got to try and come up with a new one for it to effectively work. And if you get it wrong, you can actually create cross-contamination and that can actually result in even more people dying. And this is actually, not to be ruled out, because you look at the polio vaccine, initially saved lots of lives. The harm versus benefit ratio makes it, a tick in the wind. However, because of the ability for corporations to roll out drugs off the production line where quality controls are shaved, full testing is not actually, reached, and diseases or vaccines are applied badly, you've resulted in cross-contamination, which is now actually seeing vaccines bring about the resurgence of polio in places where they were once thought to be extinct or eradicated. Real factor. Again, not something that enough press is going about, and that's the whole point. Like, okay, let's consider all the arguments, but let's not be biased about it. There is an issue of vaccines. It's, you're the media, your job is to mention both sides of the components, and that's really not happening here. So Plan A relies on this idea about coming up with a vaccine, and that it'll happen next year. Well, that's another alarm red flag, because it said, a proper vaccine takes time to develop, and there is no surety that it will actually occur. So if Plan A wins, corporations make a lot of money out of it. And they're going to make a lot of money out of it anyway, because they're going to get government funding for research projects, and the academics who also end up being science communicators that then speak for the government will do really well out of it. The politicians, if it works out really well, will stick their hands up and go, oh yes, that was me, oh yes, that was all me, vote for me, I'm so bloody clever, ha ha. If they get it wrong, they don't pay. The public pays. That's the real nuts and bolts, Plan B is basing upon the thought process or of idea of going, there is no certainty that there will be a vaccine. Running around coming up with a threat response harm minimization plan on something that might happen is a little bit nuts. Plan B is saying, let's actually work with what we've got. Let's actually do maximum harm minimization by accepting the fact that the threat that this particular level of pathogen occurs, which when you put in protections against for the vulnerability, means that we can carry on and we don't have to crash our economy, and thus we don't see more harm to public health as a result of things that we can no longer afford, or increase physical dangers or health dangers that come out of poverty. In the future, we may need to reprise that model, because it may be that other strains occur and they're more deadly, and this is, again, science. It's not a hard fix. You must always do this, you must always do that. You need to constantly evaluate it. But if the decision-making is being allowed to be influenced by corporate lobbying dollars, and by politicians, and by bureaucrats hoping to get jobs in corporations or get better government jobs, then you need to be wary. And then, unfortunately, is what we've largely seen actually play out. People say, but in hindsight. Well, again, I've argued, no, it's not a hindsight issue. There are pre-existing protocols. There has been a large element of the corporates seeing an opportunity out of a very, very real crisis and using it to push forward an agenda. And I'm afraid to say I think that's where we're at now. And I think on that particular note, we're going to go out with actually also from the soundtrack of the movie The A-Team, You Spin Me Right Round. Can't remember the band off the top of me, but I'm sure my wonderful engineers will work that out for me. This is Ben Vidgen. You have been on the Deadline Report on Fresh FM, and I'll see you all next show. Take it easy out there.